Hello, I'm Gary Kim, the editor of IP Business Magazine, and I'm here today with Stephan Beckert, who's Director of Research for TeleGeography. And TeleGeography has a new report out on international voice. Could you give us a few of the highlights from that report?
Sure. Just by way of background, the report is called TeleGeography. It's our original report that we started doing in the late 80s, tracking the international voice market. So literally how many minutes of phone calls are going from one country to another, who's carrying it, and how much are they getting paid for it. This year's edition is about the 15th edition of the report. And for the first time since we've been tracking the international voice market, we've seen a real downturn in international traffic growth rates. Historically, international long distance has grown at a rate of about 15% annually, with some meaningful variations, particularly in the years after the big market liberalization initiatives. We saw growth rates spike to well upwards of 20% annually.
And that was sort of mid-1980s?
That was late 90s to early 2000s. About 1999 to 2000, we saw a really sharp spike in traffic volumes for a few years. And then traffic growth returned back to historical trends, so the typical range being around 15%, give or take a bit. In 2006, we saw traffic volume growth fall pretty sharply to about 10% annually. That's going to present some hardships for carriers because prices have continued to fall consistently over the years, and carriers have depended on volume growth to keep their revenues stable. If volume growth starts to slow down and prices continue to fall, obviously it's going to have a pretty significant impact on revenues over the years.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, it strikes me as being counterintuitive. Well, China and India just exploding, lots of other markets getting voice for the first time, and with these very large buckets of minutes that people have on their mobiles, you would think that voice usage would continue to climb pretty much unabated. How do you explain this decline in growth rates?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for it. One is, those countries are opening their markets, and the growth in volume to those countries is exploding. There's no question about it. But if you look at the volume of traffic they're starting from, at the base from which they're growing, it's extremely small. The volume of international traffic per capita going to India and going to China is just infinitesimally small if you compare it with the volumes you see in a country like Switzerland or Singapore or Germany. So that's one reason for it. The other is that we're seeing at this point that services like Skype and other PC-based voice services are starting to have an impact on the market. Skype, by our estimates, moved about 14 billion minutes of traffic in 2006 and is on track to do about the same volume in 2007. And that's cross-border PC-to-PC traffic. That excludes their Skype out service, for which carriers do get paid and which does terminate on the PSTN. 14 billion minutes is not enough to fundamentally tank the international voice market, because that's on order of about 300 billion minutes sent via traditional channels. But it is enough to have a real impact on the rate of growth. If you look at the overall growth of the market in 2006, traffic grew about 28 billion minutes. Skype had 14 billion minutes. If that traffic had been routed via traditional channels, growth would have been about 50% higher, right, and almost exactly where it was in previous years. So Skype isn't enough to really, at any point, undermine the PSTN or undermine, traditional ways of doing business, but it is enough to have a meaningful impact on traffic volume growth and, by extension, on revenues.
Now, I would also assume that one of the other things that's happening is we're getting more voice traffic disguised as data traffic because people are simply using those mechanisms to originate and terminate calls. When you factor that back in, are we still seeing continued growth in human beings actually talking to other human beings?
Well, as far as voice traffic disguised as data traffic, I don't think that's as big an issue. And that's always been an issue. I don't think that's fundamentally changed. But if you look at the drivers of international traffic, it does tend to be consumer calling, not business calling. And also there's less need to disguise traffic. Termination rates in a lot of the world have become fairly low. So there's less of an impetus to try and disguise traffic as something that it's not. I think it's moving off of the network for reasons of convenience in many ways. I use Skype in part because I find it sometimes more convenient to use Skype or AIM to to communicate with colleagues than to pick up the phone and dial it. I've got the client already open. I have headphones attached to my computer anyhow. Why not just click the button?
Right, and the other party's there and available.
Exactly.
Right. Now, as you look at the next 5 years for international growth, do you see this trend continuing, or is there something that would cause it to change in any way?
I see nothing that's going to make that trend change. I think, if anything, it's going to probably pick up some steam in the coming years. Skype growth has been actually kind of stagnant this past year. They've been kind of in a, it's not clear where they're headed, but I think some of the sort of hand-wringing and criticisms of Skype are also overstated. You know, I wish our company were growing at the pace they've been growing and that we had their problems. So I think Skype is going to continue to grow. I think we're also going to see continued growth in consumer voice over broadband services. You know, right now we've got about, we project about 15 million consumer voice over IP lines in the US, serviced by companies like Comcast, like Vonage, like Time Warner. And we project about 30 million in Europe by the end of the year. Now, most of that traffic is still routed via traditional TDM trunks. It's originated as IP, but a lot of the handoffs between carriers are still via TDM. And most of the carriers will admit that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense over the long term. They're doing it right now because those networks were there and it was easy to do. And they wanted to focus on just changing one part of the business at once. But it's almost certain that traffic is going to go off of the traditional switched network at some point. In the Netherlands, they're already peering that traffic. And you know, in the US, obviously they've been exploring peering but haven't done anything about it yet. I think that's going to give impetus to the rise of voice over IP and to traffic moving off of the traditional phone networks.
Great. Thank you, Stephan, and thank you for watching.